I've always studied like several martial arts at the same time, and I started competing in full contact stick fighting, which in the Philippines they teach you with a 28-inch bamboo stick, but it simulates a machete. I became the 2018 national champion in full contact stick fighting for the US in cruiserweight, and then was in the top 5 in the world. I was training with some people out in Utah that were doing youth recovery and transport. So they were getting trained up to be able to like go to Vegas and like look through the tunnels and try to find missing kids that are runaways. Finally, the guy that put the thing on was like, why don't you look into getting into operations? And I was like, there's no way in hell. Like, you put me in a room with some child predator and I know they're a child predator, like, I'm going to do what I've been training to do my whole life. I'm going to try to hurt him. After really talking to the guy again, he was like, look, the bottom line is like, if you lose your cool, then you end up in a jail cell right next to people that are just like this guy. But what I can teach you how to do is catch them.
What's up? Welcome to The Rising. I'm Trey, and today I'm super stoked. We have Patrick Odle here. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you got it. Right on.
His super sick story. I won't dive like way too much into it. I'll let him speak for himself. But man, thank you so much for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
And I want to give a quick shout out. We're here at Church and State in downtown Salt Lake. They let us use their space. They have a super awesome place. If you're wondering what it is, come by and check it out. It's a super cool building. But yeah, man, thanks for being on today. And I'm just super excited to dive into you. We're talking a little bit about you and like how you've been a bouncer and done a bunch of different stuff. You're teaching. You used to teach classes at Ready Gunner. Now you're kind of diving in to your own private thing, or what are you doing now?
So I've had my own company for about 6 years now where I teach combatives. So I work with police officers, correctional officers, military groups. I recently got approved by Department of Defense to teach intelligence officers. So taking more and more like of the military style contracts and working into actual departments now. Like I've worked a lot with individual officers, but it's always been a little bit of a delicate situation with me not having law enforcement experience in the past, but I understand the tactics of arrest procedure and search procedures and escape and evasion and all of these different things that really kind of show up as blind spots for law enforcement. So I've been making more and more relationships to where now I'm being evaluated by 2 different departments to be able to teach their defensive tactics and their arrest procedures and stuff. So, I stay pretty busy, but I do active shooter training as well. There's an organization called Fight Back Nation here in Utah that's all we do is we travel to different schools and we teach active shooter training to the faculty and administration. So my company, I independently contract either for other organizations or people will contact me directly, maybe to train like a hospital staff or a mental hospital staff or college staff sometimes, because you have a lot of teachers that are having to return to their vehicles late at night and things like that. So
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right now in terms of like, I guess this is kind of a debate whether teachers or staff, hospital staff, if they should carry guns or not, or they should have them in the classroom. What's your opinion on that?
Well, the problem is that like even if we do set a guideline of like we make this a gun-free zone, right? Unfortunately, only the good people pay attention to those anyway. So you're basically just committing to having these like areas where the people that have a good sentiment are unarmed and they're not capable of defending themselves. So I've never really been a firm believer in the whole gun-free zone thing. It's kind of like making drug-free campuses. You know, it's a great theory and it sounds good on paper, but the problem is that people don't necessarily comply that are the ones that you want to comply to these things. So fortunately here in the state of Utah, faculty and administration are allowed to carry firearms if the school has a policy in place for it. So we work primarily with private schools. I can give like a little shout out to American Preparatory Academy. They're an amazing Utah-based private school system that has their own curriculum, still holds strong to American values, still takes time to acknowledge our veterans and teach the history of our country.
Crazy that that's like a weird thing.
I know, it's wild now. So they still keep a very traditional reading list, similar to the books that we read growing up. Instead of, trying to constantly update this curriculum for like controversial political standpoints or like whatever the flavor of the day is, a lot of these forward-thinking schools, not just in their curriculum, but they're also thinking of ways to try to get ahead of this violence problem, that we're facing all over the country. So, but yeah, so I did that for a lot about a month ago. And then once we get the schools that we work with all trained up, then, we don't really do it again for another 6-8 months. And we kind of come back in there and polish up with the faculty and administration. But right now it's like a couple different police departments in different states that I'm going back and forth with. And I'll be taking off next month to go and train a faculty at a mental hospital where they are in a very liberal state. So they have this vast mental health problem that isn't being addressed by any type of mental health system. It's all just falling onto law enforcement. So oftentimes these patrolmen are delivering these mentally unstable people to the medical facilities, and then
It's dangerous.
and they're sneaking in weapons, and they're pulling weapons on the staff. And these people are just in a position where they've like signed an oath to try to help people, even at the cost of their own safety. And and they're not given the tools to really mitigate this violence. So so I've been doing like more and more of corporate trainings and things, but I started as a civilian instructor. I just
Was it always like your dream job, or how did you go about like wanting to become an instructor? Like was that like as a kid growing up, you like always wanted to be combatives?
I had a job I hated, and at the time my business partner was like, if you could do anything and it didn't matter like financially, like if you woke up tomorrow and all your bills were paid, what would you do with your time? And I was like, at the time I was learning like Krav Maga, Filipino knife fighting, and I think Kung Fu or something. I've always studied like several martial arts at the same time. And I told her, I was like, I would just learn really cool stuff and share it with people that find value in it. And she's like, well, then you need to like figure out a way to do that and make a living, because you're way too smart to be miserable every day doing this job that only motivates you because of money. And like, so I started really thinking about it, and it took me about 3-4 months to shift the pieces around on the board. And it required like a leap of faith. I had to dive in head first into like competing and like all these things that I thought in my late 30s I had put to rest, in my 20s. So I did it. And
What'd you compete in?
The thing that probably made the most difference in my career, I started competing in full contact stick fighting, which in the Philippines, they teach you with a 28-inch bamboo stick, but it simulates a machete. So in essence, you're getting out there and you're like machete fighting. And I learned several Filipino martial arts systems to where they deal all the way down to the short pocket knife, all the way out to like the long machete. And I became the 2018 national champion in full contact stick fighting for the U.S. in cruiserweight, and then was in the top 5 in the world by the time all of the competition settled out. So after that, I had people just contacting me out of the blue, asking if I could come and teach some stick and knife at their school, because maybe we shared the same lineage of Krav Maga or the same lineage of Kung Fu or whatever, but we had some type of commonality, some bond, an understanding, a mutual respect of where we
certain
were.
martial art or something.
Yeah. So it kind of enabled me to like have a pretty good size audience right out of the gate. So that's what I did is, I just started solidifying all of my credentials and putting myself out there. And what really brought me out to Utah was that I was training with some people and taking courses that had to do with like escape and evasion and like tradecraft. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with that term, but basically like understanding tactics that are used in all of our 3-letter agencies, like surveillance, counter surveillance, understanding tools of opportunity, weapons of opportunity, how to sneak things into places, how to escape from other places, how to wilderness wayfind, like all of these radical things that don't really like fall into the martial arts world.
But are essential to like combatives or emergency
Yeah.
preparedness.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
to me, life, the way our
yeah,
country's headed, like, like, it's funny because, like, my dad kind of was looking at me like, what are you doing? Like, why are you learning all this stuff? And if he was still alive, he'd be like, slow clap, bravo, like, how did you know, kind of a thing. But, yeah, it's, so I did all of this stuff, and I was training with some people out in Utah that were doing youth recovery and transport. So they were getting trained up to be able to like go to Vegas and like look through the tunnels and try to find missing kids that are runaways or kids that are getting in with the wrong crowd or they're getting hooked on drugs. So I was working with those folks, and it basically turned out that like if I was willing to teach a few days, then I got this opportunity to like take their training as well. So after doing like a week-long adaptive executive protection training for children to be able to, bodyguard for kids or to recover them for the parents or mitigate like the transportation of a child that's maybe been violently or sexually assaulted or both without exacerbating that issue. So I did all of this training in mental health for youth and all of these things. And finally, the guy that put the thing on was like, why don't you look into getting into operations? And I was like, I don't know, man. Like I at the time I didn't trust myself, and my whole perception of everything was very narrow. And in my mind, I'm
in
thinking,
what way?
Well, got into this stuff because I'm very comfortable with violence, And
Have you
then
always been, or like was that?
it was kind of an evolutionary thing. It was like I was either going to be a target in the area that I grew up in, or I was going to learn to not make it free for the first one or two people. So when I was young, I started boxing and wrestling like pretty early on, around 11, 12 years old. And that kind of stopped like the gang jumpings and because kids that I was growing up with were like getting stabbed and we were getting shot at in 5th grade, 10 years old. So it's a rough neighborhood, east of Los Angeles. And
So were you like a minority in that area then?
yeah, very much so. I was in a bilingual classroom because I was the only Caucasian kid in that classroom.
Wow.
If it wasn't for me, it wouldn't have been labeled a bilingual classroom. So, it taught me to be resourceful early on and to choose my battles and to make sure that nothing was free. So, with all of that being kind of acknowledged, now this guy wants to put me in a room with somebody who hurts a child for fun. And I think of what my instincts were at the time, and it wasn't self-control, So I just got that really bad feeling in my stomach, and I took his offer and I let him speak, and I just was like, okay, like give me some time to think about it, and knowing in my mind, like, there's no way in hell, like, you put me in a room with some child predator, and I know they're a child predator, like, I'm gonna do what I've been training to do my whole life. I'm gonna try to hurt him, And after really talking to the guy again, he was like, look, the bottom line is like, if you lose your cool, then you end up in a jail cell right next to people that are just like this guy. But what I can teach you how to do is catch them. And I can get you so good at it that you can mitigate the liability and your exposure, and you could form case profiles, and you could get these children back where they belong. You could give them a second chance. And better yet, what you can do is you can stop the guy in the future from affecting the kids that he would continue to affect if you just do nothing. So is your ego worth that much? Is it worth that much for you to be the person that punishes him? Because you're not there to judge them. You're not there to punish them. You're there to catch them. The rest will work itself out.
And catch as many of them as possible.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like all my friends, all my people, they're all like cops and military guys, and they're just like, or ex-DEA or CIA or what. I'm just saying, like, my people, that's all they are, is action field people. And they're like, how do you do that? And I'm like, what do you mean? The things you've done are every bit as complicated or complex, and they're like, yeah, but there's no way I could come home and look at my kids. I'm like, well, maybe that's part of it. I don't have kids. Like, I don't have to come home and internalize it. I don't have to come home and project what I experience onto my own children, you know? But it's one of those things where, because of my life experiences, I can kind of compartmentalize, and I, like I said, I don't get to punish anybody, and it's not my job to judge them. One micro expression of judgment in the moment could get me in a pretty bad situation if the wrong person sees it. If I just slip out that I'm utterly disgusted in a moment where I'm supposed to be perfectly okay with whatever's going on, that could be all it takes, right? So when I think about the responsibility, it's very clearly just that I have to be uncomfortable in the moment so that we have the possibility of saving these kids or stopping this from happening to more children in the future.
So you're still doing these operations even now?
Yeah.
So how often
It's been a little while since I've been on my last one, but this last time it was like I was set to go, and the day before just got canceled because we solved the case, and it would be unnecessary exposure for them to send me down to. The operator that was there before me did an amazing job, and like I belong to a team of guys. It's not just like
you're
me,
playing
like,
some
running
Batman
wild,
running around.
Yeah. So I mean, I have an amazing team of guys that are all much more experienced than I am, and and they're all first responders. They're all guys that have a career. They work full time. They're taking their sick days or their vacation days to go and donate their time to rescue children. None of us pull a wage. Like, I'm on the board of directors for the organization I work with, and I don't pull a salary. None of us pull a salary. We donate our time. We go down there. We miss work to do this. So
how long have you been doing this for?
I've been with this organization. I started training them about 2 years ago, and then about a year went by between me training them on some hand-to-hand combat and knife, and between the first time they put me in the field. Because after seeing like my background and all the training I had, they're like, well,
we need you.
why isn't this guy like out there with us? Why is he just training our people? Because the stuff I teach is like very direct, very vicious. There's no martial art. We're not doing culture or tradition.
Yeah, it's not like you're bound to them before.
Yeah, it's very direct. And so they wanted that material because when we're in these foreign countries, we're not armed with a gun. Even though they're cops or they're first responders, like when we go to these foreign countries, we're armed with what weapons of opportunity we can
find,
scavenge. Yeah. So usually I'll go to a little, like a mercado, like a little Spanish market, and I'll find like a paring knife for fruit, or a little cheap folding knife, something that if I have to use it, I can just ditch it, and But we are operating in coordinates, or in cooperation with the local government. So generally we have juvenile justice, Army intelligence. We might have people from the prosecutor's office for the region or the attorney general for the country. So we have authorization to be able to go undercover, to use false identities, to get untraceable communications, SIM cards, things like that. So we're working in full cooperation with the local government, but at the same time, like, these are in countries that don't allow you to have guns. So we're going in unarmed and with what we can manage with our wits or our abilities. So that's where my experience with the blade kind of comes in. Like, I can always sneak a knife in somewhere, if not more than one. And if things got nasty, I know I can get it out under pressure, and I know how to use it. And even if I'm not the one that brings it to the altercation, I know how to negotiate that. And but it really did take things just getting dangerous enough, to where these places that were infiltrating their cartel-run organizations. So these are organized crime syndicates that were infiltrating, and so these people they're playing for keeps.
So have you seen a difference, like an uptick in activity with the current like border policies? Because I know that's like been a big thing, and it's like, so over the last 3 years, has there been like an uptick in activity with that, or has it always been equally as bad?
Yeah, I mean the downside is that the human trafficking market funds so much of the drug markets because it's a renewable commodity. Whereas if somebody sells a kilo of cocaine, then they make their money once and it travels on down the chain of command. But with the flesh trade, they sell these children repeatedly, and then once they're psychologically broken, then they'll organ traffic them. So they'll organ harvest them and traffic them for the square inches of their skin or their retinas, or so so they're using the whole buffalo, so to speak. But the downside is like most of what we deal with is sexual exploitation at the root of that, because we're taking information that we get from local informants that it's been pursued by these local governments to the point where they're kind of hitting a wall. And especially with the corruption in some of these third world countries, a lot of these officers are fortunate to have money to fuel their patrol cars, let alone be able to go into an establishment and try to grease wheels or loosen people up with some type of conversation, or but for us as Americans to walk in with American clothes and American dollars and offer to buy beer for anyone who's in our proximity, and it works. People get very loose around us because they assume that we have resources that a local wouldn't. So, and for a lack of a better term, these people are very brazen with what they do. There's not much shame or like occulting of what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll walk right up and ask you if you want drugs, if you want coke, mota, like what is it that you want? And it's pretty easy to like navigate it as long as you're comfortable in those type of environments. But we've had people come out before and psychologically like break down afterward, to get through the operation.
They'll finish it out, and then they're like,
And then they go home and it's like, it all starts piling up. Everything they compartmentalized for the whole time comes back, and it just eats away at them, So it definitely takes a certain type of person. I think that they were relieved and kind of happy that I worked out, because we haven't had another guy since me, it's hard.
Just to get to that, like, do you feel like, so your first operation, do you feel like you're pretty much primed and ready to go? Because you had a lot of experience kind of in that before. Was there still just a ton of learning?
Luckily, I'm a quick study, and I come from a background where you learn by shutting the hell up and like really tuning in to your environment, So whether it's learning how to not get punched in the face, or it's learning how to, strangle somebody in a particular way, or, but so I kind of tuned in and was able to not stand out, but I was fortunate to have had the life experiences that I've had. And as weird as it sounds, not to get all like super spiritual or anything, but like since I've been doing this work, I've been working on myself a lot more. And I think what it is now that I'm doing this, some things like from my past that maybe it wouldn't have bothered me ever. Now that I'm carrying these like bigger burdens, there's been things that have been just requiring my attention, you know? So I deal with those now. And like even when you asked about my upbringing, I think the way I would have told that story a year ago might have been different. I can look at the events and literally see how I can be grateful for every hardship I experienced because of what it gave me. And if it wasn't for the hardships that I experienced when I was young, I don't think that I would be able to do the things that I'm doing today.
Well, that's powerful. I think that's like something everybody needs to realize is that extreme ownership principle where it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like in today's day, everyone wants to look outside of themselves and be a victim in some sort of way or blame something on their traumas. I'm not saying traumas aren't real or anything like that. I'm just saying a lot of people like to blame a lot of their situations on that. And so it's really cool to hear you talk about, because, I mean, let's be honest, your upbringing sounds way harder than pretty much anyone that I know. It doesn't sound easy.
It wasn't the average Utah upbringing.
And
but
for you to like just say how it's like molded you in this way, and you've been able to build a business and been in a few businesses, and you're giving back in an extreme, like you're sacrificing your life. Like you could die on these. Like this isn't like a minor thing. Is just cool to hear that like you end up like owning your reality and able to look back and see how it's that's just really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate, right? But it's like, at the same time, like, if I wouldn't have gone through all of that stuff and, like, you know, there were feelings of, like, not feeling good enough or feeling afraid or, like, all these things I dealt with as a kid that, like, I could say I, like, more than compensated for, you know? Mm-hmm. And now the feeling that I would have that would like fuel me through all of that hardship. Like, you know, I probably wrestled like near 550 matches just in 10 years of wrestling and like freestyle, collegiate, Greco, like all of that stuff. And then I went into like the Eastern martial arts, like Kung Fu, and then I did Krav Maga and the stick and the knife and Silat and all these other things. But like, I don't know that I would have had the driving force behind me if I wouldn't have experienced that negativity or that that opposition, like young.
Yeah.
But because I experienced it and I like chose not to let that define me and chose to like overcome it. But the sad part is in some way it still defines you, you know? It's just, it can define you on a positive end, or it can make you just that fearful, reactionary person your whole life that lives in a state of like, what's next, or fear. And
the key word you're saying though, I feel like is just like you chose it. Like you chose how you wanted it to be, and it wasn't like you just sat by and like let it happen, but like, or the things happen, and but you were like, seems like you were just choosing to do rather than like just reacting.
Yeah, well, I kind of had to, you know, and the kids I was growing up around with, they were kind of vicious because they were all growing up in like gang families and stuff, you know, and this was at a time in our country where gang culture was like, prison culture and gang culture were all glorified. All the movies that were coming out at the time in the late 90s were like American Me, you know, it was like blood in, blood out. It was all this like accentuation of gang culture back then that like that's all these kids had to look forward to. And luckily my time in those neighborhoods was temporary, but the effect it had on me wasn't, you know. And by the time I moved into like sports and had that competitive nature and kind of like that introduction to like viciousness, you know, it had already kind of sunk its teeth in. But what I'm working on now is like kind of reevaluating my life and my experiences and just learning to like let go of things that are no longer serving me.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of like easier said than done, you know, but I've been using like various modalities and things that, and the funny thing is that a year ago, if somebody would have confronted me and been like, you could get rid of this and you could confront this trauma and you could do all of this, like, I would have been like, yeah, that sounds like a horrible idea and you can go to hell, Like I would have just like completely been put off by it. But now it's like I know that if I don't do this, that like it's going to hinder my ability at a certain point to keep helping kids. It's probably going to hinder my ability to have a healthy relationship, And so so it's been pretty wild. Like deciding to help other people has forced me to be the best version of myself that I can be at the time, And it reminds me of like the moniker of like, yeah, I love to cook, but I hate to cook for just me, And it's like, obviously you should love yourself and like you should want to do things for yourself too, even if you're the only one benefiting. But it's so much easier to go out of your way and like do something more extravagant when someone else is benefiting from it
When you have a
too.
purpose,
Yeah.
like a
Well,
real person that you're like
I did.
a purpose that you're like set and your goal
Yeah.
is there. So
Yeah.
like when you did your first, so when you did your like operations, do they all go about the same or like? I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, do you have any like, I don't know, like, do you have any crazy stories or like, but how does it actually go?
The first one was the infiltration of a nightclub, and I would say that that's a bit more standardized. I've taken part in infiltrating a few different places now, like probably a half a dozen different locations.
So do you use like you're saying like so you use a different identity or do you just not
Yeah,
visually get that far?
I stay close to something that would be easy for me to remember, something that if somebody's calling me from across the room, I'm going to respond to it, or it's at least going to turn my ear, because last thing you want to do is choose some cover name that you don't even think to respond to when somebody's trying to have a conversation with you. But yeah, I stay pretty close to home. I try not to keep any of my actual official paperwork on me. It's not smart to travel with your only set of real documents in a lot of these countries. So that's one of the first things you learn to do is to safeguard all of your information and your technology. So even my communications devices are all going in like Faraday bags, things like that, because I don't want there to be a crossover of my communications devices being in the same location as a burner that I might be using to communicate with these victims or the traffickers. So you learn to compartmentalize all of your communications, and that's where the tradecraft comes in. It's really understanding how to mitigate your exposure and because we might be working with these traffickers back and forth, like confirming who they have if we're looking for somebody from the States. And like, I can't be doing that from my house. I can't be doing that from any type of a known Wi-Fi signal where they're used to seeing me. So you really learn to cover all of your bases. But yes, I'm usually working under an identity that would be close for me to recognize. And I usually take on like a simple cover, like I'm a fitness coach or a boxing coach or something that if I had to talk it, I could talk it.
Yeah.
So if the guy comes over and he wants to talk about boxing, like I can talk about boxing, or, if somebody were to come over and start asking me about workouts or something, I can work my way through that. But, oftentimes I get asked if I was military. So I already like kind of know that they can smell some type of agency on me, so I really have to like, oh no, I wasn't in the military, but my dad was, or, and so I have a very unique cover story that allows for me to open people up, but it's very close to the truth. So once again, it's easier to connect to something if it's very close to real. And I talked to you briefly about being presented that opportunity by that one gentleman to like take up the training and to, try to get in the field. And I went home and I thought about it. And I think part of the reason I was so emotionally charged is because it was maybe a month before that I had just helped bury a young girl that I helped raise to the age of 17. And her mother and I separated when she was 17. I raised her from 12 to 17. And she was killed in a horrible car accident, and that's the closest thing I've ever had to a child. So shortly after burying her, then I get confronted by this guy that's like, hey, you want to get involved in saving kids? And I'm like, you want to put me in a room with somebody who hurts kids? And I was just like, not having it. And then I went and thought about it, came back to it. And, that kind of takes us full circle, right? But, when you have somebody who's being harassed by her pimp, for you to take her in a back room to rape her so that he can have his cut and she can keep living under that roof and probably being beaten and drugged. And it's like you better have something to say. You better have a story. You better have a reason why you don't want to go back there. And for me, being able to talk about being with my partner and losing a child, and that I'm here with my friends to have fun, and I want them to have fun, and I need for, that to be understood, that I'm not looking for anything from her. And now all of a sudden I can ask where she's from, what her mom does for a living, what her dad does for a living. Like, she's safe. And like, for me to like slip her 30,000 pesos, which is more than she would get if she went and got raped for an hour. And now all of a sudden she's in a position where she doesn't feel under pressure because she has something that she can give to her pimp. And she knows that as long as she stays by my side that night, she's not going to be raped by anybody else. It's like, that was pretty powerful for my first time out. Knowing that at least the nights that I go into these places, whoever I choose out of the lineup doesn't have to be groped and molested and violated for the equivalent of like 16 US dollars,
That's wild.
Right. So,
So do you typically are you able to get them out that like same night, or does it take like what?
We've had cases where they roll up pretty quick and we're able to get in there, get the evidence we need, and they're just waiting on the evidence for a warrant. Maybe they were further along on their own before we got there. So we've had cases close pretty quick, and then we've had others that drag on for 3-4 months. I go back out there for a second time and don't even recognize any of the kids that are there.
Like they've moved them somewhere else.
Yeah, they've all been moved to Peru or been moved over to Venezuela or vice versa.
So this is happening not just like in Mexico, but it happens like all over the world.
So you brought up an interesting point, and I want to make sure I touch on that, because the last podcast that I did, we're actually going to do a second sit down because there were 2 subjects that we didn't touch, and this is one of them. So without putting a bullseye directly on myself, obviously you're paying attention to the border crisis. I've looked at what some of the topics of your podcasts are.
Yeah.
And they're surrounding traditional American values and trying to get people's eyes on the direction our country's going. And these very same gangs that are being directed here by their dictators in their countries are the same exact gangs that we have that are smuggling girls from Venezuela to Ecuador, from Venezuela to Colombia to Peru, and those very same gangs are all setting up now here, and they're digging in. So if you think that they're not going to use their most profitable method for making money once they set up here, you're ignoring logic, And the sad part is that like we see these criminal syndicates down there, and I have people all the time that are like, well, why aren't you doing stuff here? Like, how come you guys only operate in South America and Central America? I'm like, well, we could think about this different ways. We could think about it as I'm not dealing with American trafficking, or I'm taking this problem to the front.
To the root.
To the gate of who's doing it, trying to mitigate it there before they're stacking these resources and moving in people and doing every other thing. It's like, there we're going after the root. Here you're ripping off the pedal. And I mean, you can go out and grab a hold of any branch and tug on it. If you don't tear that plant out by the root, it's just going to grow back, And that's what we've got here, is we've got a situation where anything we do here in the States is going to be reactionary. If we don't take it to these countries and actually start getting them to enforce their own laws and actually punish their own people, I mean, it's sad. Like, that's why we have to work with multi-jurisdictional task forces in some of these countries, because the corruption is so prevalent. If you deal with just one agency, there's no one to hold them accountable. They can sell you out in a hot second.
Well, I think that's what people don't realize is like, so especially in Utah, like the governor is going out and saying, like, I don't know if people are familiar with the JUMP program, where it's the Joint Utah-Mexico Partnership, where it's literally telling people in Mexico to come here to Utah and we'll give you visas, we'll give you all types of things. There's no vetting process that goes into it.
No.
It's just like, come here,
And
we'll
who are
set
you
you
going to
up.
send first? Say you are Mexico. Who are you going to facilitate sending first? Your doctors? Your lawyers? You know, your people that set up civil services? Are you going to send your engineers?
You don't want like the economy people, the people that make your economy
No.
just robust.
You don't send the backbone of your civilization. You get what they give us, you know?
And I think that's what's just so dangerous. And that's what makes me feel like there's something sinister, more sinister at play than like, oh, we just want to help bring in everybody and be nice and help people have an easy pathway to citizenship and provide them free services. But I mean, it just is incredibly dangerous. And the other thing is it's not just Mexico. And that's why I think a lot of people think it's like, oh, it's all these Mexicans. It's really not. From what
No.
I've seen, it's like
Mexico's dealing with a pass-through. Like, it goes all the way down to the Darien route. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but people in South America have to pass through the Darien route north of Colombia to get through to Panama. And you want to know who's doing us the big favor of paving the Darien route to nearly 6 lanes wide of a freeway? China. I have intelligence contacts right now that work in Central and South America that have told me they have pictures of the Darien route, 6 lanes wide, and the Chinese government is paying engineers to go out there and build bridges so that South America has a direct path directly into our non-existent border.
It's crazy. I wonder why they would want that to happen.
I think that what they're going for is an attack on the swing states. You know, that's why they're not wanting to have any type of voter registration guidelines. That's why voter ID is now a racial issue. I mean, let's face it, if I can't go down and get any type of government food stamps or aid or Medicare or anything without an ID, but I can go down and cast my vote that literally steers the future of our country, you know?
Well, it's crazy, and I don't think people realize how close to home it is. Like on Spencer Cox's website, he says for people to come here from other countries, they can enjoy the same benefits they see in Texas, like no income tax. I'm like, wait, I pay income tax to Utah. So like these people that come in, they call them undocumented, but illegally, they can come work here for free and not pay income taxes. And they get access to all the stuff you're saying. They get access to food, to health care, and they actually just changed. This is on their website, like the website for the state. This isn't like, you can go verify this. It's on Spencer Cox's website. They changed the definition of what a veteran is. And the new definition is people that have been detained and released at the border. It's in the veteran definition of services being offered to people in veteran services in Utah.
And their services our veterans aren't even
like,
getting.
it sounds so unreal. Like this, I know this sounds super crazy, but if you just go look at his website, there's like definitions, like new definition of veteran.
I know, and the sad part is I don't know if you know anybody that's dealt with the VA before, but they're turned down on average a minimum of 3 times before they're approved. And then you've got people coming across the border that don't even have an ID, you know, or people that are coming across that are a known criminal or known terrorist, and they're getting all of these benefits that, I mean, we look out the window in Salt Lake, you know.
Well, Sean Strickland from like the UFC, for those who don't know, Sean Strickland's a UFC fighter.
Yeah.
But he came here and he was like, I was like really excited to come to Utah. Thought I was going to run into like a bunch of Mormons and a ton of nice people. I just get down here to Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake, and there's just a bunch of crackheads here. And he's just talking about all the
That's
crack addicts
embarrassing.
he's running into and all like the illegals and all this, how poor like the downtown area is. And
Yeah.
like I think like our government wants to say like Utah's the most prosperous state, best education, best ran state, but then people that actually do come in from out of state that are like being real and they visit downtown, they're like shocked
Right.
that we're almost turning into like another Portland.
Well, that's the downside, right? Is like I've been here since 2018, so just over 6 years, and I've watched it change in that time. Like, there were places I could go up into Ogden and I could walk around, and it wasn't bad. Now I go up to those same places, I see like straight up Mexican cartel guys. Like,
Well, that's what I want to focus on. Is
you
like
know,
I know I've taken a huge
it's here.
tangent. It just
It's
is
here.
the danger is here, and it's not like the nice people. It's like the people that you go and visit in South American countries that are the bad guys.
Yeah.
You're seeing
It's
them
the
at your
very
own home.
same organizations, you know? It's just you have the people that they're pushing out and sending up here, and I guarantee you they're not coming here without an agenda. So you're seeing more and more of it, but you have this fight right now going on with like, you know, conservative and liberal media where it's like we're only getting the parts of the story that they want us to see, right? But this stuff is happening, and it's happening all over our country, and there's no signs of it stopping as far as I can see. Like, without a change of administration, we're doomed. Like, this is going to change the whole voting face of our country. Like I said, and they're intentionally busing and flying these people into swing states.
Well, the thing that's wild is I don't think people are paying attention to what's happening in Europe, like especially England. Like if you go look at England, like the British people are now the minority in their own country. And there's like a huge revolution going on. And I think it was like a couple weeks ago, there was this huge message that people put out that was like, America, you don't know how important it is for us that Trump wins. And like I was talking to a guy in Australia, and they're like,
Because the rest of the world's going to follow suit into what we're doing. And I mean, it's the same in Northern Ireland. Like, I have friends that live in Ireland, and it was like safe to like walk home at 2:00 in the morning, and you could be like a single gal walking down the street. And now you have so many like immigrants that are non-assimilated that have no intention of adopting the culture that they've moved into, and they see a woman that doesn't adhere to their culture as being rapeable, just because of the clothes she's wearing. So like, this is something I've been dealing with for over a decade. I've been traveling to Europe to learn all of my like vicious street defense and Mastro defense system and Filipino stick and knife, because over there they're not gun heavy as a culture. Their officers know how to arrest someone because they don't have a gun, they don't have a taser, they don't have the whole Batman belt of accessories to be able to go to. So their tactics are actually far superior to ours in general. So I would go out there to really accentuate my hand-to-hand and knife combatives and bring that material back here and update our law enforcement protocols with it. But the crazy part is like, you noticed I said earlier, a violence problem with America? Like, it's a violence problem in our world. Like, the minute you take guns away from people like they did in the UK, it becomes acid attacks. It becomes kitchen knife stabbings. People go into a Carrefour market and they'll buy the cheapest €2 kitchen knife that they can buy, and then they'll walk out there and they'll stab as many people as they can before they're pinned down. And oftentimes they're released 2 years later. Like, I've been in police departments before in Belgium, in Charleroi, where my instructor wanted to talk to the chief of police, and I was there with him, and I go to get a coffee, and I said, "Do you want one?" He goes, "No." And he had like a disgusted look on his face. So I get my coffee and I'm drinking it, and he talks to the guy, and the chief of police is on his way down, and he says, "Yeah, about 1 month ago, a guy comes in here and he starts screaming, 'God is good, God is great.' And then a woman comes out from behind the counter to try to calm him down, and he pulls out a kitchen knife and stabs her to death. Then another woman comes out, and he starts attacking her with the knife. Then finally a man comes out and is able to corner him and take him down and get the knife away from him. But the first woman that tried to get the knife away, she died right next to the vending machine." And I was like, drinking my coffee, and I'm like, "Good talk." And he's like, "Yep, and we're so overcrowded, I'll be surprised if he does 2 years." And that's if they even have him by the right name, because he came over with no papers. And it's out of control, you know? But I've been dealing with this stuff for 10 years because I've been going to France, to Belgium, to Poland, to Amsterdam, you name it. I've been to Greece, Italy, Northern Ireland. I've been to England. I mean, I've been all over teaching and training, Malta, Spain, So it's like I've been all throughout these places. And because they're having to evolve for this street violence problem, they're learning to get where they need to be before dark. It's like all reverting back to what it was like when we weren't the apex predator of our food chain. So they know that like after dark, there are mobs of people that roam around through the neighborhoods and try to enforce Sharia law. So when you're seeing this happening, and we have whole communities here in the United States now, whole counties that are enforcing Sharia law because we have non-assimilating immigrants that are coming in, taking over whole city councils, whole planning councils, and they're converting all of the laws in their region. This is a big thing in Michigan right now. It's like it's happening all over, and we're losing what little bit of a hold we have on traditional American culture.
And it's like, no, I mean, it just is wild. Like, I think it's time for people to look outside of themselves. And I think everyone wants to be nice. I think that's the issue, is people want to be nice and they want to help others. And I think that's great. But there's a difference between being nice and being kind, and taking care of matters first, and defending like the principles that this country was founded upon. And ultimately now it's going to turn into just protecting yourself and your family.
Right.
So, I mean, thank you so much for doing this. Like, before we wrap up, like, what can people do to help? Like, how can we help in this case against human trafficking? Like, not everyone no one's going to go down and do what you do.
Right.
But what can we do here, if anything?
And it takes a village, really. I mean, I don't expect people to do what I do, but even if it's just having those hard conversations with the young people in your life and not letting it be that big pink elephant in the room, being an advocate against the movement of the trafficking itself. It's like, I've started calling it countering human trafficking rather than anti-human trafficking. I could be anti-green beans. That doesn't do anything. Like, it's when you commit to the movement of like actually fighting something. So, when I counter something, that's doing something about it. I'm not anti-human trafficking. Any decent red-blooded human being should be anti-human trafficking. As a matter of fact, if we can't agree on that one fundamental thing to start with, we probably don't have a whole lot to talk about afterward. But countering human trafficking happens because it's not hushed. It's not shamed. It's something that people take the moment to educate each other about, and they're looking after the kids that aren't just in their yard. Like, I grew up in a neighborhood where the neighbors all looked after each other. You can bet that they had the parents' phone numbers of every kid that lived on that street if they were doing something they shouldn't be doing, or if something was seen that the other parent should be aware of. And I think that we've gotten away from that village mentality, and everybody's more prone to only worry about their own front yard and backyard. And so, speaking about it, elevating awareness is a big factor. Educating your children, keeping children with an elevated state of self-worth and an elevated awareness of their environment. Usually these guys are using things like charm or flattery. They're using tools that don't work on a healthy-minded, appreciated, empowered young person. If you look up Children's International Rescue Foundation, that's where you can find the organization that I work with. We're a 501c3 and 100% transparent. So, it just gives people the ability to do the diligence. And if they want to support us, you can always reach out to me. My company is MCC Defense. I have mccdefense.com. MCC Defense is my Insta. And and like I said, I do private lessons and stuff like that for clients around here. But, really the idea is if people are serious about supporting the organization, then I defer them to one of our board members that can explain to them exactly what missions we have on the table right now, and where their money would go and what kind of an impact it would make.
Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Give to the charity, and if you need any contact information, let me know. Reach out to MCC. One more time, what was your Insta? MCC?
MCC Defense and then Children's International Rescue Foundation.
There we go. Thank you.